Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 989, and today's date is June 5th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, as we know, on Friday, the jobs report came out, and we discussed the jobs report, and this is the worst jobs report in nearly 6 years. And we discussed that there's 102 million people out of work. They're looking for work, they just can't find work. And according to Challenger Gray and Christmas, layoffs at major firms are running 24% higher up to this point in 2016 than they were during the same time period in 2015. Now, we know it was only a matter of time before layoffs started showing up in the official employment numbers. But of course, the U.S. government, the central bankers, they're trying to explain this away of why it was so bad. They're blaming it on Verizon because of the strike they're having of 36 or so thousand people who are striking. But even if you add that number to the 38,000 jobs that were created, we're at around 74,000 jobs, which is still half, which is still awful, which is really not looking good at all. Now, since Barack Obama entered the White House, 14 million Americans have left the labor force. Now, this is coming from the BLS. Since September of 2014, 207,000 mining jobs have been lost. J.P. Morgan, their recession indicators have just soared to the highest level that we've seen since the last recession. And the White House is out there insisting that this new employment report really isn't that big of a deal. It doesn't really matter. Because we're telling you the economy is okay. Just believe us. Well, it's not okay. They've been manipulating all of these numbers. And J.P. Morgan right now, because of what's been going on, their recession indicator hit a high of 36%. And very interesting, everyone's always wondering, when's the collapse going to come? When's the next recession going to come? Well, Deutsche Bank, I don't know if they slipped up or they were trying to explain something, but they came out and they started discussing when the next recession/depression/collapse will hit. And their answer was profit margins always peak in advance of recession. There has not been one business cycle since post-World War II where this has not been the case. The reason margins are leading indicators is simple. When corporate profitability declines, a pullback in spending and hiring eventually ensues. Normally, margins compress because of cost pressures, and namely the labor share of income rises relative to the corporate share of income. But another way, when companies compete for scarce labor resources, worker pay is bid up. In turn, inflation pressures often surface. This typically induces a monetary policy response. The Fed begins raising interest rates to dampen inflation. As a reminder, profit margins peaked in the third quarter of 2014. With that in mind, and we look back at the historical data, it reveals that the average and median lead times between the peak in margins and the onset of a recession are 9 and 8 quarters. Now, if we take what Deutsche Bank has been saying, and we look at the economy, and we calculate this out, the economy, according to Deutsche Bank, would enter the recession the second half of this year. Because when we look back in time, what do we see? Well, we see back in 2008, actually prior to 2008, the business cycle between 2002 and 2007, we hit peak margins the third quarter of 2006. Distance to recessions in quarters was 6. 2009 to present, we hit peak margins in the third quarter of 2014, and we're right about there. If we go back a little bit further say, to 1983 to 1990 business cycle. We hit peak margins in 1988, the fourth quarter of 1988. The distance to the next recession was 8 quarters. If we go back even further, 1975 to 1980, we look at the peak margins. It was 1978 in the first quarter, 6 quarters until the recession. And Deutsche Bank, when they came out with this, they tried to do a little tap dance, try to explain away why, oh, no, this is not what we really meant. But it looks like at this point, they are trying to tell us that something is about to hit the second half of this year. And this is from Deutsche Bank. This is not a prediction. This is just looking at past records, looking at what they've said, and projecting it out. And it seems like we hit that same time period every single time this occurs since World War II. Now, very interestingly, Judicial Watch came out with a report that the Department of Homeland Security is quietly transporting illegal immigrants from the Mexican border to Phoenix and releasing them without proper processing or issuing court appearance documents. Now, this is coming from a Border Patrol which has told Judicial Watch about all of this. And this Border Patrol agent and supervisors that are on the front line, they say illegal immigrants are being released in droves because there's no room to keep them in detention areas. They're telling the Border Patrol people to put them on a bus and just let them go. And what they're going to do is they're going to take these individuals and just send them across the country. Now, DHS completely denies all of this, but during a congressional testimony of Bandon Judd, chief of the National Border Patrol Council, the labor union that represents line agents, Judd told lawmakers on the House of the Judiciary Committee that illegal immigrants without serious criminal convictions can be released immediately and disappear into the shadows. So we can see at this point, DHS is doing this, and they're just taking whatever illegals and just sending them wherever. They're getting working papers, they're getting benefits. And listen, I have nothing against people coming into this country if they go through the proper channels. If a person sneaks into a movie theater, should they just get the seat without paying for the ticket? If a person sneaks into a sporting event and the authorities know about it, should they just say, okay, you know what, you made it in, no big deal, take a seat? There's a reason why we have borders. There's a reason why we have checks and balances. Because the borders are the doorway to the United States, which is our house. And they have to come through the doorway. You have to be checked out, and then you can be let into the country. This is why the border should be locked down, just like you lock your house. Now, you trust your neighbors, you trust your friends, your family, but you still lock your house. Why? Because you're nervous and afraid that someone might try to get in. Same thing with the United States. People that are coming here, we don't know their background. We don't know if they're escaping their country because of war crimes or some other type of criminal activity, and this is why they need to go through the checks and balances, not just to jump over and say, okay, you're now in the country, you're allowed to stay here, we're going to do no background checks, we're just going to put you on a bus and send you off. Because if that's the case, there's no reason to have borders whatsoever. And this is pretty much what the elite really want. They don't want borders. What their whole entire goal is from the beginning is to make a one-world government. And with a one-world government, you don't need borders. You don't need different ethnic backgrounds. You don't need different countries. They want to blend everything all together and say, that's it. That's what their whole purpose, and this is what they're trying to do. Now, the FBI, they're out there, and they're not following the rules whatsoever. Now, Yahoo, they made a public disclosure regarding 3 national security letters that they received from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, demanding email records without a warrant. Now, the Justice Department made it very clear back in 2008 that the FBI needs to have a warrant. They just can't request this. Senator Ron Wyden, he said that the FBI is not adhering to the Justice Department guidance whatsoever. Now, Yahoo, they released a letter it received from the FBI, and the letter states, under the authority of the Executive Order 12333, dated July 30th, 2008, and pursuant to Title 18 of the United States Code 2709, you are hereby directed to provide to the Federal Bureau of Investigation the names, address, and length of service, electronic communications, transactional records, to include existing transaction activity logs, and all electronic mail, email header information for the below listed email IP address holders. Now, Yahoo, because they're a large internet company, they have lawyers and staff on hand, and Yahoo was aware of the laws, and they know they don't have to submit certain records. All they had to do was give the name, address, and length of service. Everything else, what was in the email, they didn't have to turn over. But the FBI uses this on smaller companies where they don't have the experts, they don't have the ability to hire the individuals they need to understand all the laws. And a lot of the companies just hand over all the information. And this is what the FBI preys on. They're hoping that if they ask for everything, the companies will just hand it over. And this is exactly what has been happening, because in 2015, the FBI issued approximately 13,000 national security letters requesting information on nearly 50,000 people. And a lot of the smaller companies just handed over all the information. Now, I've said this in the past, and I'm going to say it again. We all need to protect our own information. We need to use encrypted email. We need to use any type of encryption we possibly can. And I know it's not perfect, just like locking your house, just like locking your valuables in a safe. Of course, it's not perfect, but you still do it, don't you? Because it makes it harder for criminals, individuals to get into it. And this is what we're doing here. We're making it much more difficult for these individuals and these agencies to get your information. There's no reason why they should have free access with ease getting all the information. And this is why we all need to use encryption. We need to use products like blocketpocket.com, which is a sleeve which is intertwined with different metals. You can slip your phone into it. It blocks the signal so they can't track you. You can slip your credit card information in there so it blocks the signal so people can't walk by with scanners and get the information off the chip. We all need to do this. We all need to protect ourselves and make it much more difficult to say, hey, this is how we are fighting back. We are standing up for our rights. Now, out in the Pacific, we see the U.S. is continually provoking North Korea. They're placing financial restrictions on North Korea. They're provoking North Korea with drills. And U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter, he was out there saying that the drills that are upcoming, the joint ballistic missile defense drills between Japan, the U.S., South Korea, they're being held for one purpose and one purpose only. That is against the North Korean provocations, which is actually the opposite, where the U.S. is holding these drills to provoke North Korea. Now, of course, they're using the nuclear weapons, saying that North Korea is getting ready to launch a missile at any one of these countries. We know that Japan goes on high alert when they're doing this. And this is all alleged. There's absolutely no real proof that they're doing this. Just like when they had that earthquake up in North Korea, Japan reported no radiation whatsoever in that area. There was just an earthquake. And since that story broke, there is no proof at all. Nothing. They just went with it. And they increased military budgets. They have more drills. They placed financial sanctions on North Korea. And they're just continually doing this because they need to provoke these countries to start a war. And they don't care which one it is, as long as they get war started. Now, out in Ukraine, we see Poroshenko. He is insisting that Normandy 4, they agreed on OSCE, our mission in Donbass. And he says, it's all done, it's all complete, we all agreed. Well, that's not exactly what happened. What happened was, Russia came out And they said, listen, we have no problem with the OSCE monitors carrying a weapon to protect themselves for self-defense. And many of these OSCE officers who are on the contact line, maybe they should have one. Many of the OSCE members don't want to carry it. But he's out there saying that the police force of the OSCE will be going into Donbass, which is untrue. Up to this point, things could change, but he is using what has been agreed upon and spinning a little propaganda into it to make everyone believe that the OSCE police force will be occupying Donbass, which is not going to happen right now, unless things change. But at this point, it's pure propaganda. Now, as we know, NATO, they are moving military assets, military troops into the Baltic region throughout Eastern Europe. We see this is being done over time, methodically, very slowly, so no one really catches on what's going on here. But we can see this is a huge buildup for World War III. Well, NATO is going to be creating a new position where we're going to have a new individual that will provide intelligence sharing on terrorist groups. Well, is that what this person's really going to do? Because this person who fills this new post will focus on providing strategic guidance to NATO's military commands and streamlining information sharing between members. So it looks like they're taking this whole thing to the next level, and most likely it's going to coordinate between all the different nations to make NATO's offensive against Russia, against China, against North Korea a lot easier. Carter is out there, and this is Ashton Carter, Secretary of Defense, is out there telling China they're at risk at self-isolation from other nations in the Asian-Pacific region. And it's either you're with the United States or you're against the United States. Now, of course, what they want is they want China to work with the network rather than being excluded over what is going on in the South China Sea. Now, will China go along with this? They're putting them in a position because the U.S. is saying that we are in charge of this region. We're in line with all of these countries, and we are going to handle the South China Sea. Now, this sounds like a threat to me. Either you're with us or you're against us. And we're going to have to wait to see what China says. Now, Russia caught on drone footage convoys of military reinforcement heading from Turkey into Syria. And we can see right now that the training that's going on in Jordan, the training that's going on in Turkey, more and more Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Islamic State individuals are pouring into Syria right now. And we see that this is all being done for what is coming in August. And it seems like all the indicators that we're looking at right now are definitely pointing to this. Now, can things change? Of course they can. But at this point, we're seeing a lot of the signs that, yes, something is about to happen. We have 2 aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. Actually, one is on its way. We've talked about the airfields that they created in northern Syria. Turkey has received more advanced weaponry on the border. Jay Johnson was in Turkey reinforcing the border of Turkey, setting up surveillance. Germany is in Turkey building a new air base to bring more advanced weaponry into there. We've seen drills with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, U.S., and other nations where they've been practicing for a ground invasion. There's a drill going on now in Jordan where they're bringing in tons of military assets. And this is continually happening. And what's very interesting, and we reported this on Friday, is that the U.S. asked Russia not to hit al-Nusra because, their moderate rebels are intertwined in this. And it kind of showed that they're supporting the terrorist groups because it's very easy to say, listen, moderate rebels, separate yourselves. But they can't because they're all one and the same. They morph back and forth into each other, and the U.S. uses them as a proxy army. And something very interesting, over 200 Nusra Front terrorists attacked units of the Syrian army after crossing the border from Turkey into Syria. So we're continually getting this information that more and more terrorists are pouring in. They're coming in from Turkey, they're coming in from Jordan, and they're getting ready and prepared for what is coming. Now, out in South Africa, the U.S. Embassy, they are getting information that there's going to be some type of terrorist attack. Now, this information comes against the backdrop of the Islamic State of Iraq, saying that they are calling for an attack during the upcoming month of Ramadan. So we have Europe under a travel alert from the United States. Europe is bracing for a terrorist attack coming up sometime this summer. South Africa is also getting warnings of an attack. Middle East is saying there's going to be attacks during this same time period. So when we look at all this information, we put all the indicators together, we have to come to the conclusion that something is about to happen, because we're seeing military assets, military troops, the U.S. bringing in more terrorists into this area. It is all building up, and it will explode most likely this summer. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.